Democracy, Bridging Facts and Norms.
So my name is Miriam Ronzoni. At the moment I teach political theory at the University of Manchester in a very large and very diverse politics department, with also a strong and, relatively speaking, large political theory unit. So we have a small mini department within a department. So I guess that I would define myself as a political philosopher, but as one who firmly prefers to do that kind of research in a politics background, right? So I studied philosophy originally, but I then did my graduate work in political theory, and I've actually been in politics departments ever since. So you could say that I have a little bit of background in both, but I would say that in spite of having first studied philosophy, I became more and more interested in the applied side of the discipline, not necessarily because I also work a lot on, for instance, methodological issues, so some of the things that I do are quite abstract, but I do, let's say, appreciate feedback that comes from scholars of political science very much as well. I was in a variety of different institutions, so I studied in Milan first, then I did my PhD in Oxford, then I was at the UI for a couple of years, and in Germany, in Frankfurt for a while, and now I'm in Manchester.
Why did you choose to study political theory? What was your motivation when you decided, well, that's what I want to do?
So I guess I studied philosophy in a place where there wasn't a lot of moral and political philosophy, and it was kind of always clear to me that I ultimately was interested in that kind of topic, and also that ultimately I was interested in international issues, but it took me actually a long time to figure out exactly what I wanted to do, precisely because it wasn't really an offer. So in those years, in your early 20s, where you really starting to become an independent person and thinker, but you really still need a lot of guidance. There wasn't a lot of guidance out there. So I first started a PhD in philosophy without really having a very specific agenda. And actually in those years, I met some people who were actually not from the university where I was based, but neighboring universities who were actually doing political philosophy, and in particular analytical political philosophy. And actually they organized an event where I met Thomas Pogge for the first time. And to some extent these people, I'm talking about people, for instance, like Jan Carter, who works in Pavia, and then of course this event with Thomas Pogge in particular made me understand, okay, this is the kind of work that I wanted to do. And I guess it was three things that really struck me. Yes, I want to do political philosophy. I want to do analytical political philosophy. So this is really what I like. I don't like pondering on classics, and I like the idea of pursuing clarity as much as possible. But I want to do analytical political theory that is relevant. So to some extent, I think it was really a lucky strike to actually meet Pogge, because I think to some extent it was exactly doing the kind of work that interested me. And I guess neither of these three things were really available to me in my undergrad. So it was mainly continental, it was mainly history of philosophy, and this idea that you really could talk about something that was of really current interest was a little bit frowned upon as not really being of philosophical worth, right? Yeah. So to really find out that actually was possible.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned from the beginning that you were trained as a philosopher and then as a political theorist, and that you're working in politics departments. There are those nuances between political science, political theory, political philosophy. Is it clear, is it relevant for you to distinguish these three fields?
Yes and no. So yes and no, and I think actually initially when I got my graduate training, it was really, which was in political theory, but in a place with a very solid philosophical background, and especially, one of the cradles of analytical philosophy, such as Oxford. It was really very much, although I was in a politics department, it was really very much about getting retrained in philosophy, learning philosophy in a very new way, right? Learning that I could just make an argument myself, that I didn't have to pay homage to anybody. It was really learning how to think and how to write in a completely different way. So I wouldn't necessarily say that my first switch from a philosophy to a political science department was a switch of that kind. So I got motivated, as I told you, by meeting Poggen, by meeting other people who were really working on stuff that was really burning, right? And in particular, exactly, I wanted to work on global justice. But then I actually went and trained in a place that especially got me trained in methods. So it was really very philosophical. I would say, and especially back then, now it's different, but back then at Oxford, the people who were doing empirical political science weren't really doing political science that I was particularly drawn to. There were a lot of really electoral behavior experts. So I would say that the place that really got me interested in getting a little bit more of empirical input and how the two disciplines could perhaps cross-fertilize each other a bit, although I would say that I'm still, very, very much at the beginning of that, was actually the UI. Probably because there were people working, of course, with a very empirical approach, but they were just asking questions that were just much closer to my heart, right? So they were doing comparative political economy, comparative welfare state research. So all of a sudden, I could see that. So that was more but there was never a moment in which I got any formal training in empirical methods of any kind, right? That actually never happened. Mm-hmm. But let's say today, if I have to think, outside people who are really in my subdisciplinary area, over and above those people, whom would I like to talk to? To somebody doing logic or philosophy of language, or to somebody doing global political economy? And the answer to me is obvious, is the latter.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if you study one topic together from different perspectives, what is the contribution that political theorists can make, and what are excluded from what they can do? Right.
So I think I'm still very much in a learning curve in that respect. So I cannot really offer much more than a couple of ideas in random order. So I don't have an agenda or a clear idea about how interdisciplinary research should be like. And I couldn't even say that my work is interdisciplinary, strictly speaking. I wouldn't quite say that. I don't conduct any work that is not recognizably not political theory. But I guess that I am interested in, that three things are important to me. One is that I am interested in things about the world as it is right now and that trouble me. And us political philosophers are not the people who actually study how these things actually work, but the people who study how they actually work do not really have the conceptual language to pin down what exactly may or may not be problematic about them, right? So I work, for instance, just to make a random example, I work on issues of tax competition, or I have worked a little bit about them. I haven't conducted any research about it, and I perhaps don't even have really great skills to really be able to understand how exactly an empirical work on tax competition could be contested. But of course, I do consider my job to get up to date with the literature and understand what the main open questions are, but also what the solid findings are over which slowly a consensus is building. So that's something that I'm just, to some extent, taking. But I think that authors and people working on tax competition, even those who are working in the driest possible empirical way, are actually motivated to some extent by some normative concepts. They think that it is a problem, that they think that it's something that we should grapple with, but exactly, they don't necessarily, because it's not their job, right? So I'm not saying that they should, right? In the same way in which I will never be able to measure tax competition. So I think that that's really the area. So try and understand what's actually happening in a derivative way, right? Just by being a student of the topic, and try to figure out, okay, if this is really happening, what is problematic about it? So that's one thing. The other thing I think is the other way around and perhaps a little bit more active, namely, I think that some role, and I don't think that this is happening a lot actually, and this is something where perhaps as political philosophers could be a little bit more proactive. We could provide more input in helping formulating questions, empirical research questions. So what is it that is important to find out, right? From a normative point of view, right? What is it that we should find out? This, I think, is the case on a variety of levels, both from the point of view of the study of political science. So what sort of institutional transformations it's important to find out, right? So of course, this is something that political scientists do it by themselves, and they do it pretty well. I don't deny it, right? But it's sometimes is normatively driven, but in a sort of implicit way. Sometimes it's not, and I think it's really important for political theorists to say what are the things that, if they were happening, would be a really, really big problem. So I think this is something. But also in sociology, so from the point of view of study of perceptions and beliefs, right? So what is important to find out? Which kind of attitudes towards migrants or towards acceptable or unacceptable inequality is actually important to find out, right? So, for instance, we put in an application for a European grant recently where we actually are, if the grant is successful, we are going to do a little bit of that, right? It's about understanding which kind of inequalities Europeans find acceptable at various levels, intrastate, interstate, and so on and so forth. And one thing that we want to do is we want philosophers to actually provide some input into the questions that are going to be asked. So this is the second thing, and I guess the third one is really more methodological. I don't believe in far-fetched thought experiments, and I don't believe in them because I think they're not relevant. I might also believe that they're not relevant, but that's not my reason. I think it's really a methodological point of view. I think we don't know why we have certain intuitions about certain things. And on those grounds, I think we shouldn't trust our intuitions in really far-fetched scenarios. There's nothing that guarantees that those intuitions are reliable in any way. So the reason why I want to stick to something closer to home is not necessarily because I want to be relevant, also because I want to be relevant, but also for methodological concerns. I don't think that crazy thought experiments necessarily teach us something.
On your first point, you mentioned that you rely on empirical studies. Mm-hmm. So to come to a very concrete level, how do you select the empirical studies you're going to work on? Especially since most political theorists don't have this training in empirical social sciences. So how this selections goes to be sure that you take the latest data or the most relevant data that there is?
I don't think that I'm a particularly good example in this respect, because I don't think that I'm at the forefront or the best person, even among political philosophers. So most of the time, I just try to talk to colleagues, right? I really try to get some guidance from them, and colleagues could be either people working on these things empirically or colleagues in political theory who have a more solid interdisciplinary training, right?
And on your second point and this project that you have on collaboration, on one previous interview I made with David Miller, he exactly mentioned a case like that, where he had colleagues making a huge survey and he wanted one specific question to be introduced there, and his colleague told him, well, but we can't ask this question in a formula, in a survey question. And he was very frustrated about that. So do you think, or whom can you work with in order to make it possible to ask those questions that are normatively relevant?
Well, I think that these people were probably right in being frustrated. Sorry, I can understand that David was frustrated, but I also think that these people were probably right in saying this actually cannot be answered this way. So, without having much first-hand experience on this myself, it's just an idea. Yeah, not yet. And I don't know whether the project will be funded. Perhaps it won't. And I would say that what people need is time, right? It's that this, if it happened this way, so perhaps it didn't happen this way, but if it happened this way, namely David suggesting a question and them just saying it cannot be asked that way, period, then of course, right,